Welcome to Worth Coin. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Imagine finding an ordinary-looking American quarter that seems completely familiar, yet has a story so unusual that collectors would stop everything to examine it. Today, we are taking a deep look at the 1977 P quarter dollar, a coin surrounded by curiosity, minting questions, varieties, condition differences, and extraordinary claims of enormous value. And there is one headline figure associated with the story of this coin that reaches an astonishing $77 million. But before you believe that number, stay with me, because understanding what could actually make a coin valuable is far more fascinating than simply hearing a giant price tag. And I want you to stay all the way to the end, because after we uncover the secrets surrounding this quarter, we still have another fascinating quarter waiting in the sequence, and its story may make you look at your collection very differently. So, if you have ever searched through an old jar, inherited a collection, opened a forgotten box, or simply wondered whether an ordinary quarter could contain an extraordinary secret, this is exactly the kind of coin you should never overlook. The 1977 P. Washington quarter was produced at the Philadelphia Mint during an era when American coinage was undergoing enormous production demands, and that history is one of the first reasons this coin deserves a closer examination. The Washington quarter had already become one of the most recognizable pieces of American currency, carrying the portrait of George Washington on the obverse and the eagle design on the reverse that collectors immediately associate with classic U.S. pocket change. But when collectors examine a particular quarter, they are not simply asking what year appears on the coin. They are looking at the mint mark, strike quality, surface preservation, possible varieties, unusual characteristics, and whether anything happened during production that separates that individual coin from millions of ordinary examples. That distinction is extremely important when discussing the 1977 P quarter. A normal circulated example is not automatically a multi-million-dollar coin simply because of its date. In fact, the extraordinary $77 million figure associated with this story should be treated as an extreme claim or hypothetical valuation rather than a verified public auction record for an ordinary 1977 P quarter. Real-world coin values depend on authentication, rarity, condition, documented provenance, recognized varieties or errors, and actual market demand. And that is where our investigation becomes much more interesting. Because if someone truly discovered a spectacular example, the first question would not be, how much is it worth? The first question would be, what exactly happened to this coin? Think about that for a moment. Every coin begins its life as part of a manufacturing process. Blanks are prepared, dies are created and installed. Coins are struck under tremendous pressure, and enormous quantities can move through a production facility. Most pieces come out exactly as intended. But whenever millions of objects are produced, unusual pieces can occasionally attract attention. A coin might display an unusual strike, die characteristic, off-center appearance, doubled design elements, a broad strike, clipped planchet, die crack, or another recognized minting anomaly. However, there is a crucial difference between a genuine mint error and damage that occurred after the coin left the mint. A scratch, gouge, flattened edge, discoloration, chemical reaction, or damage caused by machinery after circulation can make a coin look strange without making it rare. That is why serious collectors examine unusual coins carefully instead of automatically assuming every strange-looking piece is a treasure. Now imagine finding a 1977 P quarter in an old collection. You notice that Washington's portrait looks slightly unusual. Maybe the lettering appears different from what you remember. Perhaps the edge seems strange. Maybe the reverse has an unexpected feature. Your first instinct might be excitement. and that excitement is understandable. But the next step should be careful examination rather than cleaning the coin or attempting to alter it. Cleaning can permanently damage collectible surfaces and may dramatically reduce desirability. Instead, collectors often photograph both sides under good lighting, inspect the edge, compare the coin with authenticated examples, and seek professional attribution when something genuinely unusual appears. This is especially important because the 1970s were an enormous period for U.S. coin production, and many quarters from this era were struck in large numbers. That means rarity cannot simply be assumed from the date. The Philadelphia Mint mark, P, is itself an important part of identifying the coin, but the mint mark alone does not transform an ordinary example into a fortune. The real story would have to come from an exceptional characteristic, an extraordinary state of preservation, a recognized variety, or a genuinely dramatic mint error. Condition can also completely change the conversation. A heavily worn quarter that spent decades moving through cash registers, vending machines, parking meters, and pockets is fundamentally different from a sharply preserved example that spent almost its entire life protected from circulation. Collectors use grading systems to evaluate factors such as wear, luster, strike, marks, and overall preservation. A coin that looks spectacular to an untrained eye may receive a much lower grade than expected, while a carefully preserved piece can become significantly more desirable. This is why two coins carrying the same date and mint mark can have very different market values. Now let's talk about the kind of dramatic errors that can make collectors stop in their tracks. Imagine, hypothetically, a quarter struck significantly off-center while still retaining enough of its design to clearly identify the coin. That would immediately create a visual feature worth investigating. Or imagine a planchet problem producing an unusual shape or missing portion of the coin. Another possibility could involve a striking issue where part of the design is dramatically affected. But again, these examples are possibilities of minting anomalies, not claims that a specific 1977 P quarter possesses each of them. The distinction matters because the coin collecting world depends heavily on authentication. A genuine error can be fascinating, while an artificially damaged coin can merely be damaged. This is also why professional certification can be so important for potentially valuable discoveries. If you ever believe you have found something exceptional, avoid polishing it, scraping it, drilling it, bending it, or trying to make the error look more dramatic. The original state of the coin is evidence, and changing that evidence can destroy the very feature that made the coin interesting. Now picture the moment a collector discovers an unusual quarter inside an inherited box. At first, it looks ordinary. It has the familiar Washington portrait, the familiar lettering, and the familiar reverse. But then the collector notices something different around the edge. They turn the coin over. They inspect it under magnification. They compare it against reference images. Suddenly, the ordinary quarter becomes a mystery. Was it struck differently? Is the feature genuine? Is it a die characteristic? Is it damage? Or could it be an authentic mint error? That moment of uncertainty is one of the most exciting parts of coin collecting. The thrill isn't simply about money. It is about discovery. It is about holding an object that passed through the hands of countless people and wondering what happened to it before it reached you. And this is exactly why you should never assume that every valuable coin will look like a treasure. Some extraordinary discoveries begin with something that looks almost completely ordinary. But there is another important lesson here. Gigantic numbers circulating online can sometimes be misleading. You may see a headline claiming that a particular quarter is worth tens of millions of dollars. That does not automatically mean every quarter with the same date is worth that amount. Sometimes a listing, speculative estimate, fictional scenario, or sensationalized video headline gets repeated until people mistake the claim for an established auction result. For serious collectors, the difference between an asking price and a completed sale is enormous. An online seller can list a common coin for an absurd amount, but that does not mean anyone has actually paid that amount. A verified auction result is a different matter because it represents a documented transaction. So when you hear the incredible $77 million figure connected with this coin, remember that it should not be interpreted as the established market value of an ordinary 1977p Washington quarter. Instead, treat it as the sensational upper-end claim that makes this story worth investigating while we focus on the real factors that could make an individual coin extraordinary. And that brings us back to your own collection. What should you actually look for? Start with the date and mint mark, then inspect both sides carefully. Look for unusual doubling that appears to be part of the strike rather than damage. Examine the rim and edge. Check whether the coin appears dramatically misaligned or off-center. Look closely at the lettering and major design elements. Compare unusual characteristics against trusted numismatic references. Most importantly, do not clean the coin. A coin that has spent decades developing its original surfaces can lose collector appeal when someone tries to make it shiny. If the coin appears genuinely unusual, professional evaluation is far safer than guessing from a random internet photograph. And there is one more reason this particular quarter is interesting. It represents the difference between a common coin and a collectible coin. Millions of coins can exist, yet one individual piece can become dramatically more interesting if it possesses a rare, authenticated characteristic. That is the magic of numismatics. Collectors are not merely collecting dates. They are collecting history, manufacturing stories, varieties, mistakes, preservation, and sometimes mysteries. Imagine holding a quarter that has traveled through several decades of American life. It may have been spent at a grocery store, dropped beside a parking meter, placed inside a drawer, forgotten in an old jar, and eventually inherited by someone who notices a strange feature. That tiny piece of metal becomes a time capsule. And that is why I always tell viewers not to judge a coin only by how ordinary it looks. The coin sitting unnoticed in a drawer today could be worth a closer inspection tomorrow. Not necessarily because every old quarter is secretly worth millions, but because genuine rarity can hide behind ordinary appearances. So, if you have a 1977p quarter, take another look. Check the surfaces. Check the edge. Check the strike. Compare the details. And if you discover something truly unusual, get it authenticated before believing any enormous valuation. Now, before we move on, I want you to remember this. The biggest mistake a beginner can make is assuming that the date alone creates the fortune. The date is only the beginning of the investigation. The real question is what makes your individual coin different. And if you have one that looks unusual, don't spend it casually just because it resembles thousands of other quarters. There is another reason I want you to stay with this series, because the next quarter in our sequence brings a completely different set of questions. And once you see what collectors look for in that coin, you may start examining every quarter in your collection with fresh eyes. We are not going to reveal that next coin's headline figure yet, because the mystery is part of the fun. Instead, keep wondering, what kind of feature could transform an ordinary quarter into a collector's dream? Could it be an unusual strike, an extraordinary error, a rare variety, remarkable preservation, or something nobody noticed for decades? That is the question that keeps coin hunters searching through old rolls, inherited collections, jars, boxes, and forgotten drawers. And remember, the coin you find tomorrow may not look spectacular at first glance. It may simply look like another piece of pocket change, but sometimes the smallest details tell the biggest stories. So before you leave, check your change, check your old collection, and check those forgotten containers where coins have been sitting untouched for years. You never know what might be waiting there. And if you thought the mystery surrounding this 1977 p quarter was fascinating, don't go anywhere, because the next coin in our journey is where the investigation takes another unexpected turn. Its identity may seem familiar, but the details collectors search for can completely change the conversation. We will uncover those details next, and I promise you will want to see what makes that coin different before deciding whether it deserves a second look. For now, remember the lesson of this quarter. Don't chase a headline. Chase the evidence. Don't trust an enormous number without verification. Look for authentication and documented sales. And never assume an ordinary appearance means an ordinary story. Somewhere among the coins people overlook, there may be a piece that deserves a much closer examination. The hunt continues. The next mystery is waiting. And this is only the beginning of our journey through extraordinary American coins. Next, 1983 p quarter dollar. What if an ordinary-looking quarter sitting quietly in a drawer could turn out to be the kind of coin that makes collectors stop and take a second look? The 1983 p Washington quarter may seem like nothing more than familiar pocket change, but this date has a fascinating place in modern U.S. coin collecting, especially when condition, striking quality, varieties, and mint errors enter the story. Some sensational claims surrounding rare coins have attached enormous figures, including an astonishing $80 million headline. But the real excitement comes from discovering what could genuinely make an individual coin extraordinary. So stay with me until the very end, because before this story is over, we are going to examine the details that separate an ordinary 1983 p quarter from the kind of unusual specimen collectors would investigate seriously, and I'll also give you a checklist you can use on a coin you may already have at home. The 1983 p Washington quarter was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, and the P mint mark identifies its Philadelphia origin. At first glance, there is nothing mysterious about it. George Washington appears on the obverse. The familiar eagle design occupies the reverse, and the denomination is clearly marked. But coin collecting has always taught us one important lesson. What looks ordinary from a distance can become extremely interesting under close examination. The 1980s were a period of enormous coin production, and quarters from this era were made for everyday commerce rather than primarily for collectors. That means millions of examples entered circulation, traveling through stores, banks, vending machines, cash registers, pockets, purses, and countless hands. Yet high production does not mean every surviving example is identical in collectible quality. The first thing you should understand about the 1983 p quarter is the difference between a normal circulated coin and an exceptional specimen. A circulated quarter can show scratches, contact marks, dull surfaces, flattened high points, and general wear. Those characteristics tell the story of its life, but they usually do not make it extraordinarily valuable. On the other hand, a coin that somehow survived with exceptionally strong surfaces and limited circulation can attract much more attention from collectors. This is where condition becomes incredibly important. Imagine two identical quarters sitting next to each other. One has spent decades being carried loose in pockets and tossed into machines. Its high points are worn, its fields are scratched, and its original luster is largely gone. The other has been carefully protected since the day it left the mint. Its details remain sharp, its surfaces are cleaner, and its original appearance is much stronger. They have the same date and mint mark, but collectors may view them very differently. That is the first major secret behind modern coin values. The date alone does not determine the price. Now let's talk about errors, because this is where the hunt becomes even more exciting. During the minting process, coins can occasionally develop unusual characteristics. A blank planchet must be prepared, fed into a coining press, struck between dies, and then released for further processing. When everything works correctly, the result is a normal coin. But mechanical problems, die issues, planchet abnormalities, or striking interruptions can sometimes produce unusual pieces. Collectors recognize categories such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, die cracks, strike-through errors, and certain forms of doubling. However, there is a major warning every collector needs to remember. Not every unusual-looking mark is a mint error. A coin can become scratched, dented, flattened, chemically altered, or otherwise damaged after leaving the mint. That kind of damage can look dramatic, but does not necessarily create rarity. The difference between genuine mint production evidence and post-mint damage is one of the most important skills in numismatics. So if you discover a 1983 P quarter with something strange, don't immediately assume you've found a fortune. Instead, study the feature carefully. Is it raised or incuse? Does it affect the entire design or just one small area? Does the metal flow make sense for a striking error? Does the edge provide additional evidence? Does the unusual feature appear on both sides in a way that could be explained by the minting process? These questions can transform a casual coin search into a genuine investigation. And here's where the story of the 1983 P quarter gets especially interesting. Because ordinary examples were made for circulation, finding an unusually preserved example can be much more challenging than finding a worn one. Think about what happens to a quarter after it enters circulation. It may collide with other coins in a bank bag. It may scrape against keys in someone's pocket. It may be dropped on a pavement. It may sit inside a vending machine. It can be exposed to moisture, dirt, chemicals, and countless sources of abrasion. Every one of those events can leave a tiny mark. Over time, those marks accumulate. That is why collectors who search for high-grade modern coins often look closely at the fields, Washington's portrait, the reverse design, the lettering, and the overall luster. One small mark can become significant when evaluating an otherwise exceptional specimen. Now imagine someone discovers an old jar of coins in a family home. Inside are dozens of quarters from different decades. Most are immediately recognizable as ordinary circulation pieces. But one 1983 P quarter looks noticeably different. It has stronger detail. Its surfaces appear unusually clean. The lettering is crisp. The coin has an attractive original appearance. Suddenly, the collector has a reason to investigate further. Is it simply a nice coin? Or is it an unusually high-grade example? Could it have been preserved under unusual circumstances? Could it possess a recognized variety? Could it contain a genuine mint error? Those questions are what make coin collecting addictive. You are not just looking at money. You are looking for evidence. And this is also where we need to address the sensational $80 million figure connected with this coin in the kind of headline-driven stories that circulate online. An ordinary 1983 P Washington quarter is not automatically worth $80 million, and there is no basis for treating that number as the established value of every coin bearing this date and mint mark. In rare coin content, enormous figures can sometimes represent speculative claims, hypothetical scenarios, exaggerated listings, or unverified internet information rather than documented auction results. A genuine valuation requires much more. It would require identifying the exact coin, determining whether the unusual feature is authentic, establishing its condition, verifying its provenance where relevant, and comparing it with actual market transactions. This distinction is important because it protects collectors from disappointment and misinformation while still allowing us to appreciate the possibility that an unusual coin can be significantly more desirable than a normal example. So instead of asking, is every 1983p quarter worth millions? The better question is, what could make one individual 1983p quarter genuinely special? That is the question worth investigating. One possibility is a dramatic off-center strike. Imagine the quarter emerging from the press with the design shifted noticeably away from the center of the planchet. If the feature is authentic and meets the criteria collectors recognize for a mint error, it could become much more interesting than a normal example. Another possibility is a broad strike, where the coin is struck outside the normal collar and spreads beyond the expected shape. A clipped planchet is another fascinating category, where the blank itself has an unusual missing portion created during the preparation process. Die cracks can also attract collectors, particularly when they produce distinctive and clearly identifiable features. But each of these requires authentication. The most exciting-looking coin can turn out to be damaged, while a less dramatic-looking feature can sometimes be a legitimate mint-made characteristic. This is why professional attribution matters. Polish it to make it shine. Never scrape a suspicious area. Never bend the edge. Never try to manufacture an error yourself. The original condition is part of the evidence. A collector or grading service needs to see the coin as it naturally exists. Another thing worth examining is the mint mark itself. The P tells us the coin came from Philadelphia, but it is not by itself an indication of rarity. Collectors sometimes focus so heavily on mint marks that they overlook the rest of the coin. The mint mark should be the beginning of the inspection, not the end. Look at the date, then examine the lettering, major design elements, rim, edge, and surfaces. Compare your coin against trustworthy references and authenticated examples. If something seems genuinely different, document it with clear photographs before doing anything else. This simple habit can prevent costly mistakes. Now let's step back and appreciate the history behind the design. The Washington quarter had already become one of America's most familiar circulating coins by the time the 1983p was produced. For generations, people have handled Washington quarters without giving much thought to the tiny details that collectors obsess over. Children have received them as change. Parents have placed them in jars. Businesses have counted them by the roll. Travelers have carried them across the country. And decades later, collectors can look at one of these coins and ask where it has been. That historical connection is part of the emotional appeal of numismatics. A coin does not have to be ancient to tell a story. Sometimes a piece from the late 20th century can be fascinating simply because of the journey it took through everyday American life. And then there is the possibility of the forgotten collection. This is where viewers should pay attention, because many people inherit coins without knowing what they have. A relative may have placed coins into a container years ago without documenting them. A collector may have accumulated pieces and forgotten about them. Someone moving houses may discover an old box in a closet. Most of the contents may be ordinary, but one unusual coin can make the entire search worthwhile. That does not mean you should expect a life-changing fortune every time you open an old jar. It means that careful examination can reveal details that casual observers miss. The most important rule is patience. Don't rush. Don't clean. Don't assume. Compare. Document. Authenticate. Those 5 habits can make you a much better coin hunter. And now I want you to imagine something. Suppose you have a 1983p quarter sitting in your collection right now. You turn it over and notice a strange feature near the rim. You inspect the obverse and see something unusual around the lettering. You compare it with another quarter and realize the 2 pieces aren't quite identical. What would you do? Would you spend it? Would you put it back in the jar? Or would you investigate? That decision could be the difference between overlooking an interesting collectible and discovering something worth professional attention. Again, that doesn't guarantee a fortune, but it does demonstrate why experienced collectors inspect coins instead of judging them instantly. And there is another reason I want you to keep watching this series. The next part of our journey takes us into another fascinating chapter of American coin collecting, and the coin waiting after this one has its own mystery. I won't reveal its headline value here, because the suspense is more fun when we discover the evidence first. But remember the lesson from this 1983 P quarter. The number printed on the date is only one piece of the puzzle. The real story may be hiding in the strike, the condition, the variety, the provenance, or a feature that most people would never notice. So before you move on, take one last look at your own quarter collection. Check those older rolls. Look through jars. Examine inherited coins. And pay particular attention to anything that looks unusual without immediately assuming that unusual means valuable. This is how serious collectors approach the hobby. They don't chase every rumor. They chase evidence. They don't believe every enormous internet price. They look for documented sales and professional authentication. And they know that a coin's story is often more important than the headline attached to it. If you enjoyed this investigation into the 1983 P quarter, stay with the series, because we are not finished yet. There is another coin ahead that could make you rethink what you thought you knew about ordinary American pocket change. You may have seen one before. You may even have spent one without noticing anything unusual. And that is exactly what makes the hunt so exciting. The next mystery could be sitting in a collection, a drawer, an old envelope, or a forgotten coin jar right now. So keep your eyes open, because the difference between an ordinary coin and an extraordinary collectible can sometimes be incredibly small. And remember, the biggest fortunes in coin collecting don't begin with a giant number. They begin with a tiny detail that someone took the time to notice. The 1983 P quarter may look familiar, but its story reminds us that condition, errors, varieties, authentication, and history can transform the way we look at everyday currency. And if you thought this quarter was interesting, don't go anywhere, because the next coin in our journey brings another opportunity to ask the question every collector secretly loves. What if the coin everyone else ignored is the one you should have examined twice? The answer is coming next.